welcome back to the DD Pod. All right, Joe, we are currently taking a vacation in Arizona. Wonderful place. Not that it's in Mar-a-Lago, but it's great. Now, what I've noticed around here is there's a lot of Mormons. A lot of them, aren't there?
For sure, Don. I've had them come to my door, and they gave me this shiny blue book. They've even got a huge church with a golden trumpet playing down on top. I'm wondering, why are all the Mormons out here, even though Joseph Smith was from New York?
I thought about that too, and the Mormons are mainly from Utah. I love Utah, and that's why here in Arizona, we're in what's called the Mormon Corridor, because they're all coming out of Utah. But can you believe the Mormons made the journey from New York to Utah on foot? Personally, I would stay in New York, but they were on the run.
Wait, Don. The viewers need to know some background about this, like who Joseph Smith even was and how Mormonism got started.
All right, Sleepy Joe, give me a minute. I was just getting to that. Joseph Smith was the founder of Mormonism. In the 1820s in rural New York, he claimed to see the angel Moroni, that golden guy on the church tops, and he told him about ancient golden plates buried by ancient American civilizations, which he proceeded to translate into the Book of Mormon. He translated these plates by using so-called seer stone and then by looking into a stovepipe hat.
Whoa, that sounds like some malarkey. Did anyone check him on this?
Well, the wife of one of his good friends, Martin Harris, stole 116 pages of his translated book, and he couldn't retranslate any of it. Smith also gave 4 separate accounts about his vision with Moroni, all contradictory, and he never let anyone view these supposed golden plates. Even so, many people liked the idea of it and followed him. Surely, he was just a businessman at the end of the day, and I can respect that.
Well, I can't imagine the reception was good, considering how odd this story is so far.
Yeah, unfortunately, it got some huge backlash. Huge. After all, Joseph was a convicted con man by this point, even before the Mormon stuff.
Yeah, wasn't he doing tricks with those seer stones before this to, quote, find buried treasure and charging people for it?
Yeah, it's already not a great look. And when he started yelling about establishing God's kingdom on earth, some people got really unhappy. The local authorities and residents in New York didn't like the growing church. The preacher from a missionary in Kirtland, Ohio, told Smith he should move to Kirtland. And in 1831, Smith took his family and some supporters with him to the Ohio region to avoid conflict with the New Yorkers.
Wow, they really just got kicked out for their religion. And you know what, man? I'm being serious. That's kind of mean. Isn't that where he bought the papyrus that held the Book of Abraham?
Yeah, the Book of Abraham, a supplementary book to the Book of Mormon that was told to be taken from ancient Egyptian documents and translated by Joseph. Well, we actually recovered some of the documents used, and they bore no to extremely little resemblance to the Book of Abraham. I'm talking almost none at all. In 1856, a German Egyptologist examined Smith's papyrus and found that it wasn't written by Abraham, but was an invocation to the deity Osiris. Joseph here had filled in some parts of the papyrus that turned out to be completely wrong.
That's weird. Does that mean that the Book of Abraham was just made up by Smith?
For the most part, totally made up. Another one of Smith's cons. There were a few parallels between the papyri and the Book of Abraham, but the Book of Abraham had embellished meaning and misidentified characters.
That's interesting, Donald. But let's get on with the westward expansion of the church. Here's the deal. They're in Ohio now. How did they get all the way to Utah?
All right, fine, Sleepy Joe. In Kirtland, the Mormons tried to build a community. They started a communist-style society where everyone gave their property to the church. They started their own bank, which ultimately failed in a banking crisis that swept the nation. Arrest warrants were put out for Smith and another member for bank fraud. Smith fled Kirtland with his followers, but not before recruiting a new convert, Brigham Young. He'll be important later.
Wow, more fraud. You know, Don, it sounds like he was just trying to be like you, with those shady business practices and all.
Let's not go there, Joe.
All right. Anyway, where did they go next?
It turns out that while Joseph Smith was in Ohio, he also had his eyes on Jackson County, Missouri. Smith claimed this was the site of the Garden of Eden, And the plan was for this to be the permanent site of New Jerusalem, the home of the Mormon community. A mission was started in Independence, Missouri, and a newspaper with it that promoted the idea that the Mormons were entitled to their land and they should take it by force if necessary.
That's quite a claim. Did they build a society there?
They tried to, but a similar thing happened there as in New York. The locals really weren't too fond of the Mormon population. However, this time they got pilot. The governor of Missouri eventually called for an extermination of the Mormons, driving them out of the area in 1839.
Gee, it seems like no one wanted the Mormons and their practices around them. Where did they go next?
They relocated to Illinois, where they bought an existing town and renamed it Nauvoo. With very few people around to oppose them, the church set up again in Nauvoo. Smith was elected mayor and chief justice of the court, setting up a theocratic community. It was basically perfect until, big mistake, Smith announced his revelation of polygamy. This sparked some criticism in a newspaper that Smith then had destroyed. If you hadn't read up on your Bill of Rights lately, that's a violation of the First Amendment. I love the First Amendment. And therefore, Smith was charged with treason and arrested.
This guy can't catch a break.
Well, he never got another break. Not one. While he was in jail, an angry mob stormed the jail he was in and killed him and his brother.
That sounds familiar.
Alright, Joe, I'm talking here. The state suspended Nauvoo's city charter and asked the Mormons to leave.
So Joseph Smith is dead, the first prophet of Mormonism, and ever since then, there have been succeeding presidents of the church, who are also regarded as prophets, and who apparently have God on speed dial.
Yeah, that's where these wonderful revelations come from, like the one about polygamy and slavery being good to Joseph and his successor.
But wait, who ended up being his successor? Didn't you mention that Brigham guy before?
The guy to succeed him was left open, unfortunately leading to a classic succession crisis. There was no system in place for deciding a successor, so multiple members of the church, mostly Smith's brothers and children, claimed they were the rightful successor. Ultimately, there was no true decision, and the church split into many smaller denominations, many of which are still around today. The largest of these by far is Brigham Young's following, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Succession crises seem to happen all the time in history. Isn't Brigham Young the guy that one university is named after? And who went where?
Yes, Brigham Young University, the Mormon University, is named after Brigham Young. Many of the smaller followings ended up back in Missouri, but we're going to focus on Young's following for the rest of the episode. The Mormons pushed west over the next year in search of a place to build a society. They landed in Utah, a barren land with no permanent settlers to drive them away. They originally claimed they deserved the territory known as Deseret, a massive swath of land spanning much of the American West.
What happened with getting the territory?
The government stepped in and stopped them from claiming Deseret. They were allowed to establish Salt Lake City, though, the current home of the LDS Church. It was one of the first major settlements in Utah, and Young became the first governor of the Utah Territory. And that is how we got here today, and why they're knocking on our door all the way in Arizona.
Wow, that's quite a story. Thanks for telling us, Don, and thank you for tuning into the DD Pod this week. We'll be visiting Tombstone next week, so don't miss that exciting bundle of stories on the next episode.